Hello, everybody. Welcome back after, I'm going to say a summer break. I think it's been more or less since Easter. As far as I had a few changes, so I had to step away for a while, but I'm back now. Alex is back as well. Yeah, just back from residence meeting as usual, talking about, were you talking about residence parking permits? How exciting.
Yeah, applying for a residence parking scheme because, I mean, if you're in Huntingdonshire, you'd have noticed the civil parking enforcement started, technically like in August, but like now it's being enforced. So of course it works in most parts, but there are some areas in towns, especially in central areas, where perhaps it was a good idea to have a residence parking scheme first, but now other solutions need to be found so residents can actually park in the area. So yeah, a lot of conversations on parking recently.
Okay, and Martin's back. Martin's back with a second new granddaughter. Congratulations, Martin. What's her name?
She's Lorelei, and she was born a few weeks back. I was actually up in Sheffield with her yesterday, having a few cuddles and taking my mum up so she could have some great grandma cuddles.
Did you change any nappies? Not yet. It's something that has to be on the agenda, doesn't it?
No, delegate that. That's why he's got parents. That's why she's got parents.
That's one of the good things about being a grandparent, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so we
my other granddaughter today as well, so it's all good.
So good Sunday stuff. Okay, so we're back after a break, and I think we're going to try and come back on Sundays regularly now, aren't we? I think we're all refreshed, and there's so much going on in Cambridgeshire politics. It's a good time for us to come back as well. Having said that, though, and David Landon Cole is also back, but he's not here this weekend. I was drinking beer with him and talking about Warhammer on Friday, so he's all right. He'll be back maybe next week or the week after. So David is around too.
Sorry, this thing you were talking about Warhammer, and he's all right. Do those two things?
Well, as all right as David can ever be. He's a bit.
No, I'm just taking the mick. My son does Warhammer, and I just don't get it. I get it I got it when he was 15.
Well, I'm in the process of moving at the moment, trying to sell all my stuff. I'm making quite a lot of money off all the crap I bought a couple of years ago on eBay. So that's all good. Right, but we're going to start off not on local politics and talk a bit about national politics, although something that might also have an effect on Cambridgeshire as well, which is your friend, Alex, the Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner, who is no longer Deputy Prime Minister because she had to resign because of a stamp duty scandal. So what do we all think about Angela Rayner?
If you want me to start as somebody that, my personal view, I've said this in a few places. One of the things I think once the report had come out and they said that she hadn't acted with the conduct you would expect of a minister, there was no other way this was going to go. I have no bones about that. And one of the things we should say is that the system worked. And one of the things under Boris Johnson was he stopped it working. Where there was ministers found wanting and he kept and he stood by them. So I don't think she had any choice to go. One of the things that has annoyed me about it is the gloating from other parties, from the Conservative Party in particular, and certain people within the Conservative Party, because this isn't just a bad thing for the government, and it is bad for the government. There's no two ways about it. It's a bad thing for politics. The winners from this are the populists. And I did a thing on LinkedIn and on my Facebook political page, where I put up a banner that said, "Do not feed the populists," because that's what we're doing at the moment, and we are walking blindfold into a reform government. And if it's not a reform government, it'll be a mishmash because of the success that Corbyn's bunch of populists from the other side have. And so, that's where I'm from. And I have concerns about the impact of her going as well on policy as well. I don't know if you've got any views, Alex.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think obviously it was the right thing to do, like her decision to step down. We have another deputy leadership election as well. But I think what's often overlooked when you have those kind of like scandals is what actually the record of the politician was when in office. So like I think there are some positive things that were done and should be continued by the predecessor and people who are like now in the roles, and also like there was a major reshuffle as well, so we can speak about that. But for example, the progress around workers' rights, the some of the housing policy, like some of the reforms to planning, for example. So I think often when something like this comes up, we kind of forget what was done that was positive. And yeah, I have to say that I think in terms of Angela Rayner, I always liked how she, whether people liked her or not, like she was quite outspoken and really honest about some things, whether you agreed or not with her views. So I think she set a lot of the direction of some of the policies. So I hope the new government and people in new roles will kind of continue that the good things in the policy that came about.
That's the big thing for me, is the momentum. And you know, I've been around for a long time because I'm old. And one of the things I know is, and I've seen for many years, is governments come in, ministers come in and say, right, you know, we're going to change policy, and they publish a green paper or they publish a white paper, and by the time it gets to become a bill, it's watered down to the effect that it makes very little impact. And you know, we were starting to see some things around, you know, the proposals with you know, the planning, is it the planning and reform bill or whatever, wherever it was. That was, you know, we were seeing that it was going to make an impact, and we were already seeing it in some ways in policy as well, through the direction that the planning inspectorate have been given as well. And there is a danger that slows down. And I think the same thing about local government reform as well. Along with a lot of people, I have real concerns about the process with local government reform, and the fact that it is coming across as quite rushed. There's a reason it's coming across as quite rushed. It's because it's quite rushed. But
yeah, but they're getting it done though. So that's, you know, that the alternative sometimes is talk about things for years, isn't it?
Well, and you'll talk about it for years, and what will happen is you'll go into it, and in 3 years' time, or whenever it is that we go into a general election campaign, there'll be this big grassroots campaign from councillors, from everybody else, pushing on parliamentary candidates, pushing on political parties. And all that will happen is it will get talked out during the general election. And so a much needed reform won't happen. So I think the best thing to do is make this reform happen, and then take another look at it in three years afterwards.
Yeah, I think there's always a danger, like when you have especially a major reshuffle of positions, that some of the work that was in progress and actually working will be overturned. So like the good example for me is obviously work on immigration and asylum policy is the Home Office. And I think, you know, it's a good appointment, but at the same time, some of the things, despite the headlines and everything being focused on small boats, which is a small percentage of overall migration, I think in a lot of other areas of migration, actually some progress was made. So I think there's always a concern of someone new stepping in and kind of overturning the stuff that was actually working. I hope that won't happen, but I think that often we're perhaps too critical, saying, well, it clearly doesn't work because look, the headlines are still there on immigration. Whereas if you actually sit through debates or listen to the Home Affairs Select Committee, you'll see that some of the things actually do progress.
I actually have some real concerns about it. I actually didn't think Yvette Cooper was doing a bad job, to be honest.
Yeah, I agree.
I know the difficult thing is the government are being pushed and pushed to make this happen fast. And it's one of my issues with politics. A lot of political change, you know, it does take 5 to 10 years to make it happen. And you know, you could see slowly but surely some of the stuff was happening. So as an example, you know, we were starting to see a slight increase in the number of asylum seekers that were being returned after failed asylum applications. And I just think, you know, even on that as a national policy, you know, there's going to be a big about change made, and there was hints at it this morning. So moving out of hotels and into barracks, and there's two things with that. Old barracks, the process costs more, and it costs more than hotels. But the other thing is, when they were in barracks before, and old barracks before, there were protests outside those barracks because people didn't want them there. So all we're doing is moving from one unpopular system to another. Why not do the stuff that's really needed, which is to get the issue and the system sorted properly and spend time getting it right, just slowly but surely. But the trouble is that's not where politics is, because the likes of Farage pretend everything can be done instantly.
Yeah. So go on. Can you? Sorry, I've interrupted you. Can you just explain? So you said that you got to have a deputy leadership election now. Yeah, but I understood that David Lammy is the deputy prime minister. Is that just a temporary appointment until you do the
No, it's different. You could, in theory, have a different deputy leader of the party, because Angela Rayner resigned as deputy prime minister and deputy leader of the Labour Party, and that leadership and deputy leadership of the Labour Party is a totally separate process. You need to get nominations from members of parliament, and then whoever makes it on the list nominated, there's a complicated process to it, but you get a members vote in the end. So you could, in theory, like, obviously, if David Lammy chooses to go for it, have the same, or it could be different. There have been other different.
I think Angela Eagle has said she's going for it today. I think it was Angela Eagle.
Quite a few people. I think Emily Thornberry. Like, there were other people like Louise Hay.
It was Emily Thornberry I saw this afternoon said she was going to go. I want to put a suggestion out there that I think would be very, very interesting. So the government have said that they want elected mayors to be to have a really important future, and I hope that policy continues as well, actually, because it's one of the few ways we're actually getting genuine devolution. So what about Andy Burnham running?
I mean, he's a man with an established track record, isn't he? I don't know if he's popular.
As an outsider, I would really, really like it.
I think that's a really interesting suggestion. I don't know enough about the Labour Party or their policies, but I'm a big fan of Andy Burnham, and he's got lovely eyelashes as well.
It certainly is possible. There's no two ways about it. Within the Labour's constitution, you don't have to be an MP to be a deputy leader. So, the possibilities there. I just wondered if anybody,
As long as it doesn't, I don't think he would want to reduce his focus on Greater Manchester, would he? Because I think he acknowledges that's a full-time job. If he can do that while still keeping his eye on the Greater Manchester ball game, and
he's been doing that job a long time, and he's been doing it very well. But it should mean that he's surrounded by a lot of people he can trust.
Yeah.
So he could still effectively be, as mayor, be a director of Greater Manchester.
Yeah.
And get a couple of people to step up while he fills this role as well. So I think possible.
Good for the profile of our third city. It's not a second city, is it? Because Birmingham's second city, I think it still is. And that's good. I'm quite sad to see the temporary back of Angela Rayner, because I always liked her because she was straightforward. She was one of us, wasn't she? One of us, especially talking as somebody who still considers himself a working class boy. So she was, she seemed authentic and not as distant as many of the politicians that we've just listed. And she always wore a heart on her sleeve. And she was, I never really understood the negativity she attracted. I think partly because she was female,
controversial sometimes.
Controversial.
I think that's good in politics. Sometimes you have to say what you mean.
Yeah, but not they. Some people end up being like lightning rods as well, and right wing people attack them constantly, and I really hate that.
Yeah, I mean, there's things she's done in the past that you could look at and go, actually, they're not particularly wise, and she certainly didn't endear herself to the Conservative Party. I think she at least on one occasion described the Conservative Party as Tory scum, I think. Exactly. That sort of stuff doesn't help.
No, it doesn't. There's
a couple of other more controversial quotes that I'm not going to go into that she did as well, or she's reported to have said. But I do think it's a loss. As somebody, as a one nationist, you want people that can champion success from the grassroots and from working class backgrounds and that sort of stuff. And she certainly did that. And, there's an argument that what she's done is very one nationist in the way she achieved. Mm-hmm. And it's also worth saying she was found to have acted in error in not taking legal advice.
Yeah.
Wasn't found to have deliberately done something wrong. And I think it's important to stress that as well.
Well, I'm glad she's gone, because after what happened before with the previous regime and people not going, she's done the right thing going. Yeah, but a very, very close friend of mine is an accountant, and she messaged me. She was the first person to message me when it was happening, and she says it just goes to show how complicated the taxation rules are in this country, aren't they? And yes, absolutely, she should have done the right thing, and she should have taken professional advice, but the whole of our tax system is overly complicated, and part of me thinks but for the grace of God go I, as I move into a new property, possibly might be involved for a short period of time owning 2 homes, and of course the involvement of her young son, who has got disabilities as well, you know, and I've seen some horrible memes, including photos of him this week. So I have a huge amount of sympathy for her, but I'm quite sad to see her go, because she was a bright light. I mean, don't think that Sir Keir Starmer is the most charismatic of people, and I think Angela Rayner definitely is. But it's right that she's gone, and it's a bit
the one thing Keir Starmer needs to do is pull everything that's happening together within the government. He needs to pull that together into one big package that says, this is what we're about. This is what we stand for as a party. This is our big strategic direction. That's been lacking so far. And I hope the changes he's made, including the changes to number 10, actually enable him to do that, because it really is needed. The Conservatives didn't have it either, by the way, not for certainly since Theresa May couldn't do it. She wasn't allowed to because of the ERG. So probably since David Cameron, the Conservatives never had it as well. But we need something like that where people can see a vision, and it's about economic growth, yes, but it's about how planning ties into economic growth, as an example, you know, how that all pulls together, what it's going to mean, you know, in the long term for, you know, okay, yes, short-term pain in terms of taxation, probably in terms of a bit of austerity as well. But when do we come out of it, and what do we emerge as? And it's that sort of stuff they've really got to start doing, because otherwise the people like Farage and Corbyn will as well, will just tear these people apart. You know, and tear it apart just with this short-term statement. And, you know, Farage's statement on immigration the other week, it just came undone literally within minutes.
Well, it's because he realized they actually need more than 2 weeks to pass the legislation, even if putting all the questions aside on whether how you're actually able to enforce that, or like the legal standing of that, it still takes longer than 2 weeks to actually legislate for anything.
So here's a comment. Go on, carry on, Martin. Then we'll talk.
So but just give you an example about Farage's stuff. One of the first things that Farage backtracked on was that he would not send minors back to the country of origin. Okay, so straight away, what he has said is we need an assessment system, because one of the most difficult parts of the asylum process is looking at and assessing, and I'm sure Alex has seen this in the same way that I have, assessing who is a minor and who isn't. And
yeah,
they've got
the age
teams
assessments are really controversial sometimes, because it's difficult to do.
Controversial. These guys sit looking at photographs and different bits and bobs, trying to work out who is a minor and who isn't. And so as soon as you say, I'm not going to send minors back, you are going to have a lot more people claiming to be minors, and you're going to have an assessment process for it. So straight away, you know, it comes undone, and you start seeing things. He said the same thing about interpreters as well, by the way. And the same thing again, you get a load of people saying, yes, I was an Afghani interpreter. And yes, there's a register, but it's been published, it's been leaked. So people are going to say, I'm X person, I'm Y person. You're going to have somebody to assess that and look at that. And so, you know, what he's saying he wants to do is just not deliverable, you know, in the terms. And yes, it'll take a year, 2 years to get the legislation through as well. So people need to wake up and smell the coffee is the reality.
So Brian says the main problems were being invaded illegally by unknowns, and all political parties must come together and agree on what the solution is. The word illegal there might be a bit controversial. We might disagree about that, but honestly, the rise of reform demonstrates that it is a national issue, isn't it? And we have to find a solution. And whether you're kind of a wet left winger like me, who, you know, is sympathetic to the cause of these people quite often, and I always think that if my family were in danger and fleeing, I would want to go to a safe place in the best place possible. I think we'd all would. Yeah, but it is a problem.
But also, we're straying into something that is sort of much bigger territory than we normally deal with. But I feel really strongly about this. When you're living in a country that's been impoverished for whatever reason, often because of bad leadership, you know, and you know, a bad political leadership, and you're looking and you're seeing a selective view of what the West is like in terms of aspiration, and you're looking at your family and how your family is suffering, you are always going to want to try and find roots in. You're always going to find a huge percentage of people wanting to do it. And Trump is going to find this out eventually when he, yes, he's putting his big Mexican border up and all this stuff. People are just going to try and go around the border.
Yeah, there always another, that's the issue that, like, obviously before small boats started, like, well, a few years back, and were like the main thing in the media right now, there were lorry crossings. Right, so like the kind of like lorry crossings that we saw like 10 years ago. You remember the whole like kind of home office discussion around like tackling lorry crossings and how people fell from lorries and they were presenting themselves as unaccompanied children in local authorities because of the lorries and like the dangerous journeys through lorries. Now the smuggling gangs and like, different criminals across the world are encouraging more people into boats rather than lorries. So like if you like manage somehow to stop that route, there will be a different route. Potentially will be back to some other ways. Like, I agree with Martin, people will try anyway. The question is like, how do we manage the system properly?
There's a couple of things that you need to do, and first of all, for me as a one nationist, it's about aspiration, and it's about helping people to have aspiration in their own homes, in their own cities, and in their own countries. And if you can do that, and by the way, in doing that and in improving economies overseas and stuff, there's a comeback to the UK potentially in terms of revenue and whatever. And if you do it sensitively and do it well, you'll reduce the number of people that want to go and seek asylum. And it's all about that aspiration and giving people hope for their families. There's no two ways about it. And just this is the way I put it. If you go back to Disraeli's time and when Disraeli founded One Nationism, and you look at how Britain was then, okay, communication then within Britain was very limited, and people were just seeing where they are. But since then, the world has shrunk, and the view people had of that time of the gap between the rich and the poor, which is, exactly what One Nationism highlighted and was there to deal with. You're getting the same vision about the gap between the rich and the poor around the world. And so what you've got to do is take those same One Nationist principles that worked in Britain for 150 years before the Conservative Party abandoned them and apply it internationally. And people might say that sounds left wing. It's not, because economically it makes sense as well.
Well, it's the investment in that's a difficult conversation, because obviously like the people who are strong voices against, like, for example, like stopping all the boat crossings, also against international aid spending. And actually, I was recently, this August, went to Jordan on a work-related trip to see some of how they manage migration there. And obviously Jordan has majority of refugees from Palestine as well as Syria there, and how they're actually using in some projects UK international aid, and how that is not only an investment in terms of the UK's impact in regional stability and impact there, but also in terms of obviously if more people were supported there, fewer people would take dangerous journeys. And I was speaking to some of the actually Syrian refugees there, saying that how they have family members who are, without legal status in other European countries, including the UK, and how often when you kind of stop investing in countries closer to the conflict border, people do take those dangerous journeys because they don't feel they have enough access to, food or opportunities there. So there, I think there's a strong case to be made for the UK development funds and international aid in that sense, in terms of thinking it alongside what we can do domestically in the Home Office.
What worries me on top of all this, and for a second, just forgetting the plight of what I think are very desperate people who are doing the best for their families, largely, not in every case, but mostly, is that what it does for our brand as a country, and the fact that some of this is being misdirected at all immigrants. It's all right to say it's just the people crossing, so-called illegal immigrants crossing on boats and being annoyed about that, but lots of people come to work here, lots of people are used. If we want to compete on an international scale, and be a successful economy, we have to have, I work with some fantastic people, always have, from around the world, who come here because we want them to work and contribute to our economy. We've got a massive demographic crisis with elderly people like me and Martin. We have to have younger people paying taxes, and we have to have some of the best people in the world. And if those people are being scared away because we're portraying ourselves as being a society that's anti-immigration, and I've seen that. I've seen that since Brexit. You used to work in London with loads of Belgian people, Italian people, French people, lots of whom they've just pissed off home because they don't want to be part of it.
You know, I remember talking to the vice chancellor of the university about this years ago, and talking about, you know, what is it that makes Cambridge the best university in the world? Now, there's a dispute about whether it is the best university in the world, but it is.
Imperial College London.
But it is. And one of the things he said is we need to be able to attract the best postgraduate talent from around the world. You know, and he said, you know, the fact that we've got a record of being able to do that and attract the best talent around the world is what makes us keep being great. And yeah, you really don't want to scare those people off by being sycophantic, because they offer and they give so much back to the British economy.
But that's one of the concerning things for me, because everything migration in the media is purely small boat crossings. I don't say this is not an important issue. It needs to be addressed. However, that's like 3% of our migration. So where is the national conversation on integration policies, for example, or on supporting people into work, for instance, or on like English provision locally, or on actual policies that could actually help perhaps have a more positive view on immigration as a whole if we actually worked on those. And it's really frustrating because often, related to Martin's comment on students, now the white paper, for example, proposes to shorten the time the time a graduate can stay after their university course in the UK to find a job and so on. And I feel that kind of like narrative that we see at the moment impacts people like that actually you can argue it is positive that people have 2 years to work in the UK after their studies. They could contribute to their taxes there. They're educated in the UK. Why not? Why do you have to shorten that to kind of tackle the numbers? But I think a lot of the pressure, because we're focusing on when people like crossing in irregular routes rather than speaking about migration as a whole, it's really difficult, because then you can't make the positive case for like any other group, because you're so stuck into just speaking about asylum hotels. And by the way, I don't think asylum hotels should have been used in the first place. It was a response to like a crisis, because it was quite slow to process. Like the contracts we have with the asylum accommodation hotels were like well done years ago as a temporary accommodation solution. The issue is because the backlog has grown so much because of the way the system is managed. Now it's more of a not permanent, but it's not a temporary accommodation solution as it was intended to be. So I think actually the government has done some work towards moving away from that. There are like maybe, I think there are 200 hotels now across the UK compared to 400 a couple of years ago. But of course, it is not one single solution to kind of completely transform the temporary accommodation system we have at the moment.
Yeah, but my problem is that there isn't a solution, that the only solution there is, and this is something the government were working on, which was speeding up the assessment process. Because there's a reality that while you've got this number of people sat there waiting for a year and whatever to be assessed, there are going to be people for whom that is really, really uncomfortable. And that's the thing you've got to deal with. And there's a reality. It's what I said before. You know, when they were using old barracks before, there were protests outside those barracks. You know, there isn't a simple way. You know, what's the alternative? You know, are you going to start putting them up in housing when we've already got a crisis with, you know, a housing crisis in the country? You know, the only way you're going to, and it's got to be a medium to long-term solution. You know, this instant, 2 weeks' time, we'll send them all back. It's great to win votes. It's not great to deliver a government with, because it's not practical. It won't work. Anyway, I tried very hard to get this back to Cambridgeshire, by the way.
I was going to say, this is diverse. This wasn't on our agenda. We were going to talk
about it was not.
I'm going to partly blame mine, who did mention that as being part of the issue, and also Brian in the comments who threw us a bit of a curveball. But it's good to talk about these things, isn't it? And step outside of our comfort zone for a bit. Paul, who I know, I think Paul's from Peterborough personality, I think. And he said, I'm not going to get into this.
Sorry, Paul is a Peterborough legend.
Wow, a legend, he is. He is. A local radio legend as well.
BBC Cambridgeshire presenter, and a fantastic one as well.
So maybe we should get Paul on sometime as well. We're not going to discuss this rejoining the EU, but just Paul thinks the solution is this, and derail Farage. I'm not actually convinced, and I think it might incite the issues even more, because that was quite a divisive thing. But Paul's saying that next year is the 10th anniversary of us leaving the EU, or the Brexit referendum. Is it really 10 years? And that makes me feel
can't be far off, because you remember it was 2015. We lost Cameron as Prime Minister, wasn't it?
Yeah. So,
or 2016, something. Yeah.
So it's lovely to have Peterborough dignitaries listening to us as well. We'll have to have Paul on sometime. I've never actually met him, but I've had a few online discussions with him.
I actually did a podcast with Paul a few years back during one of the 2019 general election, I think it was, and it's quite an interesting listening back on that. It was called Spoiled Ballots, because during that general election I spoiled my ballot and I made it known beforehand I was going for.
So if we should get a professional broadcaster on to make us look really, really bad sometimes. So thank you for that comment, Paul.
He definitely would do that.
Moving
Actually,
on then.
Paul is good. He's good at. He's making very mediocre talent look very good. He did that with me a couple of times.
Good. Right. So actually, when we talked about this before off mic, and you said we're going to have a nice little segue from Angela into local government reorganisation.
This is my favorite topic in the world.
Immigration crisis. Yeah. So. Angela Rayner has been, hasn't she, the leading advocate or the front person, for the whole local government reform, Since we talked last, that is now picking up some steam, isn't it? Because I think we're due to submit, or the local authorities are due to submit their preferred options is it by the end of November, Alex?
November, so it would be like for county, like it's discussed at full council meeting, I would expect in October, because that's the only meeting before the kind of deadline. So I'm expecting a paper and debate in the October meeting.
So that will be interesting at county as well, because one of the things that happened is, so there are 3 options on the table, and I
can't... more if you count the option from the Peterborough MPs. There's option A, option B, option C, and as these options now are starting to come into the public's consciousness, so people are starting to discuss them. That now we're starting to say, why don't we have option D, E, and F as well? Which are legitimate questions, but at some stage in the past, and we talked about this, the leaders of the local councils, not the local councils themselves, had to make a decision to down select to a number of potential options, and then those options are being funded by various councils to go forward to get a business case, because you can't make decisions without data. And previously I've said on this podcast that I didn't think the data was very good, and I've been called out from that by some of my oppositions. But having said that, several months on, I've seen draft versions of one of those reports, and the data was as good as it's going to be. There's never going to be perfect data, and this is an intractable decision, and we can argue about it forever. It's a difficult decision, and it's going to be hard to make. And I suspect perhaps the government's going to be the one that makes it eventually. But the interesting thing is, so you said that Cambridgeshire County Council might be having a debate on this before. Well, I hope so, because if you're going to submit the proposal in November, and obviously it's not a cabinet system unlike district, I think it should be like on the full council agenda in October, or at least a paper that people could, councillors would comment on or discuss. But it's quite clear the county council's political administration preferred option is option A. That's why the current survey we have at the moment asks about option A. So as an opposition councillor, I guess I would just express my views if given the opportunity in the debate.
Yeah, but so I was quite surprised by that, because we had, before we went away, we had some really lukewarm consultation about local government reorganisation. We didn't have the options, and was really talking about the value of local councils, and I don't think there was much value to that, and I think it was a bit disingenuous to even put it out there because people couldn't have a say. Now, County Council last week have come forward with their own consultation on, I think, is it option A? The option puts South Cambs, Cambridge City, and East Cambs together, and then Fenland, Peterborough, and Huntingdonshire together, as their preferred option. But the way that's being portrayed, and I would suggest that's a political decision, and one that is not apparently endorsed by the county council yet. That's being put forward as a county council thing using public money, and I find that a bit odd. I really do. If you've not discussed it, and I can't see the value of putting out this survey talking about a single option when there's 3 on the table, because how can you even process that data? Because I mean, by definition, it's biased one way or another if you've only got one option out of 3, and so I find that whole situation odd and a bit uncomfortable, if I'm honest.
If you, from a personal perspective, it smacks a bit of gerrymandering, to be honest. I think what they're looking for is something, putting one option forward and then turning up at a debate at county council and saying, residents said they liked option A. I'm not convinced that's what will come back, but I think that's probably what they're hoping for, and I think it's a shame. I'm increasingly of the view that that Huntingdonshire is going to be the loser in this. I have to say, and I think it'll be a shame because it's a district with a lot of potential, but I still increasingly believe that the best option is to split Huntingdonshire in half as well, because it doesn't make sense to have places like Yaxley as part of a Cambridgeshire authority, but it does make sense to have St Neots, Huntingdon, because of the links there are across into Cambridge.
I think there is
growing economic links as well.
There is some consensus that if any of the existing districts had to be split, then Huntingdonshire is the most likely. But well, this is, I mean, Alex and I have talked about this off mic as well previously, is that we were given the very strong advice in the beginning from the letter from Jim, what's his name? Jim McMahon, saying that they preferred us not to split existing boundaries, and that's been taken very much to heart. Yeah, and whether that's entirely true or not, the business cases that are being proposed, well, the 3 official business cases that are being proposed just stick to existing district boundaries and combine them in different ways. As Alex says, there's a renegade 4th suggestion from the Peterborough MPs, which talks about basically Greater Peterborough and engulfing some of Huntingdonshire, I think, and some of Fenland as well, perhaps, but certainly the northern bit. I mean, Yaxley. Now, my very good friend Sally Howell, who's on the cabinet HTC with me, as a Yaxley member and an independent. She doesn't think, although there's Yaxley is very close to Peterborough, she doesn't think that there's a unanimity of opinion in Yaxley that they want to be part of Peterborough as well, because Peterborough doesn't always have the best reputation. I work there, and I think
I have real concerns about Fenland becoming part of Peterborough. I don't think there's any other option, in reality, and I think and hope that some of that would deal with. And there are some benefits to Fenland becoming part of Peterborough. Some of the links across to Fenland, as an example, are places where we think, once you cross over, this is a bit sort of geographical for people that don't know Fenland, but you go from Whittlesea and you cross the Nene and you go to where the old Dog and Doublet pub is. As soon as you cross the Nene, that road becomes a responsibility of Peterborough. But the reason that it's Whittlesea residents that use it most of the time, and there's a really strong argument that road for many, many years was neglected by Peterborough, and actually before they realised they'd got a problem and they needed to sort it, that neglect resulted in some people stoofing into the river, unfortunately, and losing their lives. It's horrible. But you'll hear that argument around quite a lot. Economically, I think 80% of Whittlesea people, as an example, work in Peterborough, and I'm sure you'd get probably a similar percentage, probably marginally less from March. So you sit there and look at it and think, and also being blunt about it, my views about Fenland as a council. I don't think it is entitled to much of a say, to be honest.
Well, but
I don't think people will listen to it.
Well, and here's the thing, and it's probably controversial you saying this, but I think I've said on social media today that Huntingdonshire District, you said, Martin, HTC is a great example of a local authority in which politics is done right. Yeah, that's partly down to the administration, which I'm part of. Yeah, but also lots of credit to Jonathan Gray, and Ross Martin, who've done opposition really well. I think they've been a tough opposition who continually hold us to account, but they do it in a respectful way. Always. We don't always agree, and sometimes things get a bit argy-bargy in debates, normally when I'm involved. But that's partly that's theatre. But actually, behind the scenes, I think that our opposition do a great job, and we look at some of the stuff, and we're going to go and move on to Fenland next,
and Peterborough as well. I mean, there's
Peterborough.
I agree with you. Like Huntingdonshire feels it's actually like whichever side you are, it's more pragmatic politics. And I'm really concerned you're like lumped together with councils who don't do that.
And it's worth saying, if you're a Fenland resident, the first thing you're going to look at with Peterborough is to look at, as an example, that there have been, I think, a couple of people questioned by the police, and I can't remember. Watch what I say. But there have been a couple of issues that I don't know the exact reasons for, and I don't think we're allowed to say even if we knew. And they've been in the press, so they're not difficult to find, and those are quite serious issues. And if I was a Fenland resident, I'd be looking at that. Well, I am a Fenland resident, and I look at that and think, what are we walking into, and what are we potentially going to get? And that is, that to me would be a concern as well. We want to go into an authority that, at the very least, is moving in the right direction. They've just, they've just lost the leader as well, and you sit and look at it and think. And that's unrelated, by the way. I just want to make that point. But again, you want to go into something where there's a bit of stability, because Peterborough's got huge potential. The university is going to prove to be a fantastic asset to Peterborough, and linking closer to that university, which I hope merging Fenland with Peterborough will do. I think. Will be good for Fenland as well. So it's difficult, but the authority itself doesn't help. No, I agree completely, and that's a concern. All I can say is I hear what you say about gerrymandering, and I am concerned that this is going to become political, as in that people in certain parties will be deciding the options that they most benefit them. They think in the future. Organisation of the councils that emerge from all this, and I can say with my hand on my heart, from HTC and certainly people in the cabinet, is that what we're doing at the moment is there's 3 options on the table, one of which puts Huntingdonshire with South Cambs and Cambridge City, which seems to be the thing that lots of people around this part of the district would want as well.
Yeah, and St Ives, pretty much everyone has spoken.
St Ives is definitely, especially because of the busway, is a Cambridge commuter town. It really is, isn't it? And and St Neots is going to get the new A421 and eventually East West Rail. Yeah, and so all of those things are true. Yeah, but I think I don't think you're not going to see HTC putting out any press releases with preferred options. I don't think, unless anything changes, because I think what we want to do is hand on heart is to wait till we get the business cases back, and make our decisions based on data. And I still hope to see a clear argument emerging. I think sometimes when you can't make a decision, you have to wait until you look at all the data, and sometimes the right choice emerges. And so my preferred option for now. Without having signal data, is that the Huntingdonshire would become part of South Cambs and Cambridge City. I don't think it's a particularly likely outcome, but I think but we'll just have to see. That I think that's the answer.
I tell you what would be a really good idea is if all 3 of us post the link to the 3 arrested in council misconduct probe onto the comments page. I think it'd be a really good thing for us to all do.
Oh, did you post that? It comes from all of us. So when I'm hauled,
yes,
again,
I posted it and it's come up 4 times. So that's probably my fault. Then.
Let's be clear that when I get done on another code of contact,
somebody post it at the bottom as well. I want
people how did this appear here? I haven't posted it.
It is a very vulnerable situation. So talking about proprietary in local politics and concerns about how certain councils are run. Martin, in Fenland, can you tell us about clowns and crayons?
Yeah, this is it's a horrible story to read about Fenland, but it doesn't surprise me. And that's the bit that I find disappointing. So one of our councillors is Whittlesey Town Councillor, Fenland District Councillor Elizabeth Sennett Clough has resigned from both councils and forced the by-election, which is fine, and she's want to do. And one of the things I would say is people looking at this need to look at this and think, why are we getting so many by-elections in Fenland and in Whittlesey? And they need to ask some questions. And when I stood last time as an independent, last time somebody resigned, I raised the issue that we need to seriously start asking some questions, and said there was things going on that I would tackle head on if I was elected. They didn't elect me, fine, everything else. But it's quite clear the issue hasn't gone away. And let me just, this is from Cams News. So if anybody wants to see it, camsnews.co.uk. This is Elizabeth Sennett Clough's comments. here's what she tweeted: "If I wanted to be in a playground, I'd work in a nursery. I refuse to waste any more of my time on clowns with crayons." And that's quite a serious comment. When it comes down to it, it's from a resigning councillor. And, I talked about the quality of debate and the quality that there is within Huntingdonshire that I see. And then you see this in Fenland, and you understand, that this isn't the first time. We've had allegations of bullying in Fenland in the past and all sorts of stuff. And you start looking at it and thinking, there's something wrong here. And, I would be looking, I've raised questions about Peterborough and, the issues going on in Peterborough. But if I was a Peterborough City Councillor or a Peterborough resident, I would also be looking at this and saying, do I want to become a local authority with these people? And it's a real issue, and the by-election is going to be a real issue as well, because I strongly suspect that what it's going to be about is stopping reform. To be honest,
yeah, absolutely. Well, because so during my time as a county councillor, Fenland at district council level and at county council level was almost entirely conservative, if not entirely conservative.
Yeah,
which is not, it's not very healthy, is it? I don't think. I said earlier, one of the reasons why HDC is such a good council is actually the biggest single party in HDC is the Conservatives, who are a strong opposition with strong councillors. Yeah, and I strongly believe that you need to have both those things. You have to have a good administration, and you have to have an opposition who can hold them to account. And that hasn't happened in Fenland for quite a long time, Martin.
And I've had even during my time as when I was a member of the Conservative Party, and I'm not anymore. I'm very, very politically non-aligned. I can look at both parties and see benefits at the moment. Certainly the Conservative Party at the moment, I'm not a member of. But even then, I used to have conversations with both Labour and the Lib Dems, and say, look, you need to start getting yourself organised in Fenland, because there's a reality, which is that part of the reason why the opposition don't succeed in Fenland isn't because they don't have a core vote. It's because the political parties are not well organised.
Yeah, because you're not doing any campaigning that actually gets we can't rely anymore on the base vote. You have to do door knock.
And you only have to go back and look at the results of the county council elections and look what an organised reform party did terms of creating an opposition. And Fenland desperately needs it. And it might be one of the benefits of a merger between Fenland and Peterborough as well, is that, the Labour Party, the Lib Dems might recognise that if they want a sniff of power in Peterborough, they're going to have to organise themselves in Fenland.
But the interesting thing, going back to LGR again, is that the Conservatives, control district council because hasn't been elections, and because they're still holding the reins when it comes to local government reorganisation, But at county council, there's only two Conservatives left. I think it's Steve Tierney and Sam Hoy, who are they the only two Conservatives at county left?
No, Chris Bowden as well.
Oh, Chris Bowden. So three of them left. Sorry, Chris. Yeah, Chris is So there's three of them left. But so we've got a by-election coming, and so reform have taken nearly all the county council seats. It's quite a small council anyway, isn't it? But so the by-election is going to be a really interesting test case to see again how reform do, and how the political parties get together. And I was at the count in May and putting my arms around lots of my previous Conservative foes in Huntingdonshire who lost their seats, really good councillors, who'd lost their seats to reform, and it's a difficult thing to happen. And it's going to happen, possibly it's going to happen in this by-election. We're also, I think we're expecting to have district council elections in May unless something changes, possibly for a 1-year term, which is a bit bonkers. And so everything could change again, couldn't it, in that time?
My gut instinct is they won't have, if they move ahead with local government reform, I don't think they will have elections. I think what they will do is postpone the elections for another year, and they'll run shadow authorities for a year. And those shadow authorities and how they run is going to be really important too.
I think that would be sensible, but almost everybody I speak to in the upper echelons of Cambridgeshire local politics, or especially Huntingdonshire local politics, thinks that we're going to go to elections next year, and lots of those people are tapped into better sources in Westminster than I am. And so at the moment, I know everybody who's a councillor who's thinking about, running, if they want to be a district councillor after May, are starting to thinking about campaigning again. So that might well happen, and again, that could cause another massive shock, couldn't it? In Fenland.
Can you imagine the turnout a year later when they've got the new elections for a new authority, and you've got these guys that are it'd be 3 elections in 3 years?
It's
Is
silly.
that right?
Yeah, but I think one of the issues, of course, is town and parishes, or lots of town and parishes are up next year as well. So there are going to be elections as well. So who knows? Nobody knows. In fact, we haven't got a clear answer. Is a bit worrying because it's not very far from Christmas, is it? Not really. Not in real time.
Yeah, there needs to be a little bit of clarity put out, and this is part of what the government aren't good at doing. Sorry, I'm moving on to a national level as well. Is providing that clarity. Partly, I think, because Angela Rayner wanted to stay on the front foot, and as soon as she started putting clarity in, it provided openness for challenge, and so I'd have a bit of sympathy with that. But yeah, we need to be moving on. But it's also true that some of the Conservatives in Fenland, and they seriously need to be looking at what they're involved in. That's the reality. Do they really want to be involved in a party that has these sort of ructions? And I would say the same of Conservatives, in Whittlesea as well.
Is there an issue? Is there an issue here other than the clowns in Crayon comment? Yeah, which is very descriptive, and I think very, very, very. I mean, it's a very powerful.
I would expect it from Elizabeth, to be honest, but it's a very powerful comment. But yes, there is foundation to it. So I think this is something like the 6th by-election since in Whittlesea, since the last something around that, since the last elections. So that says there's something wrong as a start. It's something that I stood on a platform of last time, and I mentioned that there were people talking to me who had resigned as councillors who were saying they were being bullied. But and it's everything that goes on in and around that as well, where they spend the whole time dealing with pettiness almost, and yet nothing strategic hardly ever comes out of Fenland. So I'll give you a great example. The most important thing probably going on in Fenland at the moment, local government reorganisation is one. The other one is the Fens Reservoir. I have had nothing through my door from Fenland at all, or by email, and I subscribe to emails and stuff like that talks about the approach that Fenland are taking to the Fens Reservoir. Mm-hmm. So how are they using the Fens Reservoir to create a tourism boom in Fenland? We know the reservoir itself. We know Anglian Water will do all their stuff. We'll have tourism coming out of its ears around the reservoir itself. But how are you going to link the market towns in Fenland to that reservoir? Say, as an example, using the reservoir as a hub, as part of a hub and spoke model, to get people in, so that people that want to come for a weekend at the Fens Reservoir, can stay in Whittlesea and cycle.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Stay in Woodbeach and cycle, or wherever. What is there coming out of it about that? I had a bit of a spat with Steve Tierney, and he was right, by the way, about an issue in Fenland to do with civil parking enforcement. And we know civil parking enforcement is moving forward in Huntingdonshire.
It's already in, yeah.
Yeah, well, it's already in, yeah. So in Fenland, it couldn't happen. And I always made the point that when I was a county councillor, they said to me, with civil parking enforcement, it wasn't practical in Fenland without parking charges. Car parking charges, excuse me, I've got a cat attacking me. Without car parking charges. Fenland decided and have moved ahead and started to move ahead with CPE. And the last thing I heard was they had abandoned it because the cost of doing all the work to get all the signage right and everything else so you could actually enforce and do the civil parking thing was too much. And I said to Steve, that was the last I heard was that. And apparently it's still moving forward. Who's told us that?
No.
I had no idea. I thought it wasn't.
Well, there was an article. Well, Steve Tierney tells me it is, and you know, he's a cabinet member at Fenland. But there were some articles on Cams News as an example, which you know, talked about the cost of it and the cost going forward again. And so there are still questions. But again, Fenland district councillors won't engage with Cams News. So if they publish something like that, it'll go uncorrected. You know, you see the flack that Reform have got in Nottingham for deciding not to engage with a Notts Post. Well, Fenland are actually taking, or Fenland Conservatives are basically taking the same approach with the Cams News. And so, you know, it just shows you, you know, exactly where we are. There's a real dearth of vision and within Fenland. And so what we get from the Conservatives is, look how great we are. We've kept the council tax down.
Yeah. Difficult, isn't it? It's difficult. And actually the political, having been on the cabinet for HDC for 3.5 years, and actually starting to reap some of the rewards from some of the difficult decisions we took in the past, you know, it takes quite a lot of political will to see some of these things through. Civil parking enforcement, although all the councillors were agreed that we should do it, you get it in the net because it takes a long time and it's expensive, and you know, and it brings up questions about whether we should charge more for parking or less than for parking. So all those things, and so you have to be a strong administration, and you have to be able to communicate with the public. And I'm sure HCC don't always get it right, but you know, I've always tried to talk about these things, and you get these things ring. You know, even unpopular things like the green bin charges we got through, Market Square stuff is not always popular in St Neots, and all these things are council tax support, which, you know, all those things manage to get through, but that requires quite often political will, and when you have infighting and no communication, those things are difficult.
I'm going to watch it because I'm going to cross over between work and this podcast, but it's a really good example. So I would give my eye teeth just for one document from Fenland of the quality of the people strategy that Huntingdonshire published. I really would. You know, my clients absolutely love it. And, you know, one of my projects, we literally mirrored the language and the colour scheming in that strategy, so we could show how we were trying to work with the district council, because that document was such good quality. And there's nothing of that sort, you know, comes out of Fenland at all. And it's that sort of stuff. Yeah,
we have a great comms team as well, and lots of will behind doing those things. I haven't always been 100% in favour of some of those things, because, you know, they can seem a bit arty-farty and, you know, not have too much substance. But, you know, when you're saying things like that, clearly, you know, having a strategy and having a vision is important, perhaps more than ever in a situation moving forward.
If anybody wants to have a look at that document, it's called Huntingdonshire Futures, and it's informed Huntingdonshire's local plan process as well. If anybody wants to have a look at it, I would absolutely recommend it, because if you're a Huntingdonshire resident, take a look at it, and you'll see what they're trying to do with the fact that Huntingdonshire is going to take growth, and they're trying to make it work positively.
Okay, so we're coming up to an hour on Sunday evening, So and I think we've dealt with all topics we said we would, including having a dip into the small issue of stopping boats and things. But I'm always happy to go there as well.
A whole afternoon on that only, like if we actually want, which I think is a good idea.
I want to say we talked about immigration, not stopping boats.
Yes.
And I'll just make that point, because as Alex quite rightly said, boat traffic is a minor part of it.
Yeah, I mean, an immigration-related podcast, because I think actually because of all the news media is mainly focused around irregular crossings, actually there's very little access to information that is what's going on the other types of immigration routes, like work migration, student migration. It'd be quite interesting to discuss those.
It'd be interesting to have that discussion, perhaps with somebody who has an opposing opinion to us, because I think we're largely in agreement, and that doesn't always make for the best discussion. So maybe we'll have to find a guest from outside of our comfort zone. I don't think that guest is going to be David, because he's going to be more wet than the rest of us.
Can I just say thanks to everybody that took part in the comments as well.
Yeah, if you go onto Facebook, There's a
don't
long
always
discussion
publish them.
between Brian and Paul, and it's respectful and interesting as well. So thank you to both those
So,
guys.
and I know those two know each other as well. So, that's part of the reason for it. We're always going to have stuff we disagree with, and we're not always going to be able to post everybody's comments on here. But we really do appreciate it, and it does help us. So thanks.
So just to finish off with, Thomas has asked, I guess can we have more bins in Priory Park?
It's definitely your patch.
Yeah, and he's also got a nice dog on his photo, which I approve of as well. So thank you for asking that, Thomas. It's one of those difficult ones. There are quite a lot of bins in Priory Park, and not sometimes adding extra bins doesn't reduce the amount of litter. I think what happens on a nice weekend, and the sun was shining this weekend, is that the bins get very full for one weekend. But because people don't take their rubbish home, and what really people should be doing is taking their rubbish home or going to the next bin if it's full up, and putting more bins in doesn't always help that. I think it's a difficult question, but we'll have a chat. I'll have a chat with the portfolio holder. But in general, the bins the number of bins is basically sized towards demand, and we look at these things all the time. So hopefully the bins which are full today will be emptied today, tomorrow, or the next day. So it's a good observation, and I don't really know the answer, but usually when we hear these things, the answer is probably there's enough bins, and that's probably as many as we can afford to provide, honestly. So thank you very much for sticking with us through our long break. We're going to try and do this regularly now as well. What I'm going to try and download this and put it out as a podcast again, which is what I used to do for a bit, or put the YouTube video out as well so people can catch up in the week, because I do have lots of people asking me what happened to the podcast, and I certainly love talking to you guys, and I've had a lovely conversation, lovely interaction with the audience as well.
I've had a couple of comments from council officers from different places telling me off because we're not doing it again. So
same on my side. I think people I never thought were watching, and sometimes people watch after the live as well. So I think definitely trying to put them on YouTube or some form to watch them would be great. But people missed the podcast in August.
I know at HTC certainly that part of the core audience is the officers and the opposition, because I quite often get notes about something that I haven't properly thought through and said off the cuff, and get mild tellings off or questions. So but it's great to have people listening, and so
it's part of opposition watch as well. So hello to the opposition who are watching, if they are.
And if anybody does watch this from Fenland, tell Steve Tierney I did tell him he got it right. I did say he got it right. I don't say that sort of thing very often about.
Yeah, I was going to say that's a very positive note to end on.
Even a blind squirrel sometimes finds a nut, is what I'll say. All right, thank you very much.
It's a bit unfair, but
Steve's just character, and I enjoy talking to him. Right, have a lovely whatever's left of your Sunday. I'm going to go and watch the NFL, which starts today. So, bye everyone. Thanks for listening. We'll be back next week at a similar time, I hope.
Cheers all.
Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.